Hello, everyone. Today, we are going to be continuing our series on interviewing. We spent yesterday talking about all of the pre-interview routines that a good journalist needs to go through, as far as getting prepared and touching up on the subject material that the interview is going to be about. So if you have the opportunity to interview Tim Cook from Apple, then you need to be familiar with what's going on in the Apple world, what's going on with the latest iPhone, with the latest MacBooks. You need to be able to go through all of those pre-interview routines so that you're ready for the actual interview itself. And one of the most important ones that I want to go ahead and touch up on again is you want to go ahead and get a list of questions going for the interview. Now, you might not wind up using any of those questions, but it's good to go ahead and have those questions written down so that you can help facilitate some of the discussion. If some of the discussion drags or the direction starts to go somewhere that you're not quite sure about or doesn't really make sense or might not be very useful for a story, then you can fall back on these questions that you've prepared ahead of time to help get yourself ready, to help get you and the person you're interviewing back on track. So now that we've got the pre-interview out of the way, we want to talk about the interview itself. To begin, you want to be at least 5 minutes early. If your meeting is with Tim Cook at Apple and he says that he can give you a 10-minute interview at 12:45, you want to go ahead and be there by 12:40 at least. But you really probably want to go ahead and get there a little bit earlier, maybe 12:30 or 12:35. But you want to be early. You do not want to stroll into the interview right at the time that you said that you would be there. Think back to school. When you're back in your traditional classrooms, you have to get to class before the bell rings to start the class. Now, if you stroll into class right as the bell is ringing, sure, class time starts then, but you are considered late. You need to show up a minute or two before that bell rings to be counted on time. Interviewing is very similar. You want to show up a few minutes before the actual interview begins so that you have time to set up, to get prepared, and to ensure that you're not going to be late. Now, talking to somebody that you don't know can be difficult. It can be intimidating, and it can be hard. Breathe. Don't forget, they are a person just like you. Even if they are older than you or have a higher rank or societal position than you, they are humans too. So if you're nervous, it's always good to start an interview with a couple of icebreakers. Go ahead and introduce yourself. Remind the interviewee of your name. And then, furthermore, remind them of the reason for the interview. If you're there for a particular purpose, if you're interviewing Tim Cook for the iPhone specifically, go ahead and remind him of that because he's in charge of a lot of things. He might go into this interview thinking that you were talking about the MacBook line, and then when you say, thank you so much, Mr. Cook, for meeting with me about the latest iPhone, that will help shift his gears back to talking about cell phones and not laptops and desktops. Always remember to smile and make eye contact. Now, eye contact is difficult. We don't have good practice in eye contact much anymore because so much of our interaction with society is through virtual means, through computers and through cell phones, through texting and Snapchat, that it's hard to make eye contact sometimes. But when you are holding a conversation with a person, you want to maintain eye contact. Now, that doesn't mean stare at them. It doesn't mean don't blink and make them uncomfortable. But it does mean that you should be able to hold their eyes with your eyes more often than you look away. And the very first question that you always ask a person, every single time that you interview a person, is, how do you spell your name? It doesn't matter if it's a name that you know like the back of your hand. It is so incredibly important to get names correct, to make sure that you spell names correctly, because your name is the only thing that everyone is given at birth. It's the only thing you can take with you, and it is the one thing that you carry with you throughout your entire life. So always, always, always ask them how to spell their names just in case. It is better safe than sorry. Now, the interview itself, when you converse, when you talk, give some input, right? When you interview somebody, you aren't getting a lecture from them. You aren't getting just this is me telling you about what our company is doing. Well, no, you're talking about it. You are engaging in conversation and encouragement cues, right? When you talk with your friends, you nod to them, you hold that eye contact, you chime in every now and then, right? You don't necessarily interrupt them. Don't interrupt anybody, but you agree with them. You say you hear the mm-hms and yes or sure, things of that nature, right? You hold a conversation with them. Now, when you begin your conversation, you want to ask a lot of how questions and why questions. You don't want to ask a lot of yes or no questions. For instance, if you're interviewing Tim Cook, you might say, you might wonder about Cook's progression up the Apple line, up the Apple chain of command. Instead of asking him, was it difficult to get to your position? Was it difficult to become the CEO of Apple? Ask instead to describe his process of becoming the CEO of Apple. Because if you just ask him, was it difficult to become the CEO of Apple? He can fully answer your question with yes. But if you ask him how he got to his position at Apple as the CEO, well, then he has to tell you his journey. He has to tell you how he started out, the kind of hours that he put in, the kind of workload that he had to do, and how it changed and got easier or got harder the more it progressed. And there is where you can get content. There is where you can get details for a story. One of the most important questions you can ask a person when you're interviewing them, particularly if you're interviewing a person about their life, is, tell me about a time when you blank. For example, my grandfather was a bomber pilot in World War II. If I were to interview him, I might have asked him, tell me about a time when you were flying over the Pacific Ocean. What was it like? Was it tense? Tell me about these kinds of things. Now, here are some ways that you can help ensure a successful interview. First and foremost, you need to know how to redirect the conversation back to getting on topic. Now, we said that you might not wind up asking any of the questions that you prepared, and that's true. But if the person you're interviewing starts to drone on or get really off topic and it's a topic that you know that you can't use, go ahead and redirect. It's okay to say, hold on just a second, I want to make sure that I get this right. And you go back to a topic that you've been talking about, because then that will shift the conversation back to the relevant topic, and you will be able to help stay on task, maintain the topic, and keep getting information about the story that you're there to ultimately write. Another trick is you want silence. Do you hear that? Maybe it's the faucet running in the kitchen. Maybe it's the dog barking. You want to listen. You are interviewing somebody for their story. And so while you can certainly chime in and hold a good conversation, it's not your job to dominate, and it's not your job to talk most of the time. You want to let them talk at least 70% of the time, if not more, if not 80% of the time. You also want to ask follow-up questions, right? And the follow-up questions can be similar to the tricks to redirect. I want to make sure I get this right. Do you mind further explaining, or do you mind elaborating on that? What do you mean by that? Some of these questions are what we call follow-up questions, and they just help further the discussion and facilitate the discussion. And ultimately, you want to be flexible. Again, sometimes the story that you planned to write isn't going to be the one that gets written. But maybe it's because instead of telling you about the latest iOS 14 release, Tim Cook at Apple has decided that he wants to tell you about the newest iPhone that they are preparing to release. Well, that story would catch a lot more attention, and so you need to be flexible and be okay with, hey, Sometimes there's a better story out there just waiting to be told. Now, when you conclude the interview, there are 2 questions that you need to ask. The second to the last one is some combination or some form of, is there anything else you thought that I would ask but didn't? Or, is there anything else you'd like to say? Depending on the topic and the person that you're interviewing, the person being interviewed might have been looking forward to this interview for days and weeks and wants to make sure that all of the appropriate information, all of the relevant information is out there. And so this is a wonderful opportunity to put the ball in her court and let her know that you really do care about the topic, that you're very interested, and you want to make sure that you get all of the information that you can. And then the last question that you always need to end with is, if I have more questions, may I contact you? Now, if you ask this, make sure that you have the contact information, a phone number, an email address, some way to get in touch with the person. But you never know when you go over your notes to write your story if you're going to wind up needing a second interview. And it's okay to set up a secondary interview. It's okay to set up what we call a follow-up interview. Now, you always, always, always want to thank the person that you interview. It doesn't matter if you are interviewing Tim Cook or all the way down to your best friend and your teammate on the football team. You want to thank them for their time, thank them for their information, for their story, but ultimately thank them for their time. You also want to promise nothing. And what I mean by that is you don't want to tell them, oh, this story is definitely going to make the front page, or even the story is going to make the paper. Because the world of journalism changes so much. While the story that you're writing might be the biggest and most important story on Tuesday, well, by Wednesday, before the paper prints, there might be another story that is even more pressing, that pushes the paper out of the front page, or even pushes the story out of the paper entirely. So you don't want to promise anything, but you do want to thank them for their time, and you go into an interview expecting the paper to wind up, or expecting the story to wind up in the paper, and your interviewee knows that as well. So you don't have to worry about making reference to the paper, because that is the expectation. But if it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. Sometimes it doesn't always get to work out. Now, when you get back to your office to write the story, you want to go back over your notes as quickly as you can, fill in all the information while it's still fresh. And then you want to go ahead and start writing 2 or 3 different leads, 2 or 3 different intros to keep your train of thought going. However, after you do that, you want to put the story away for a while, put it away for an hour or 2, and then come back to it. Because you don't want to get so caught up in your train of thought that the story that you write winds up not being clear because you were there and you got all the information, but your readers didn't quite get all the information. You also want to follow up if you need to, and you want to make sure that you meet all of your deadlines and that you communicate with your editor about deadlines coming up and about the story. Now, we have a little bit of homework. Over the course of the next couple of weeks, we are going to be conducting an interview and writing a story. So, what I would like for you to do, I know this is Thursday, but I'd rather not have homework due for you guys on a Friday night if I can help it. But you also still have your first blog post that will be a discussion post. It will not be on Blogger, right? Flipping it over to help remind you guys, your first non-Blogger post, right, will be on your discussion boards. You post that, and then you respond to a classmate, 2 to 3 sentences long. That will be due Sunday. However, you do have a homework assignment, a small one, due Monday. What I would like for you to do is come up with a list of adults that you might want to interview. I would like for at least 2 potential adults and no more than 5. You're only going to wind up interviewing 1, but it's always good to have a backup plan. Now, these people need to be inspirational to you. They need to mean a lot to you. They could be parents, grandparents, faith leader, scout leader for Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts, coaches, teachers, somebody who you look up to. And I would like for you to list them I would like for you to list their name and their relationship to you. So again, it could be, insert name here and then it's your mom, or insert name here and it's your dad, or it's your basketball coach or your volleyball coach, or what have you. I would like for you to come up with this list by Monday. Now, again, we will eventually interview one of these people from your list. But for now, just come up with the list. Just come up with the brainstormed ideas of who you might want to interview. Now, I know that COVID is still a thing, right? We want to be safe. We want to be careful. And so, obviously, if you're interviewing your parents, of course you can interview them in person. But if it is not safe for you to interview somebody in person, phone interviews and Zoom interviews are just as valid and just as real as in-person interviews. But again, we will get to that part later. Right now, for your homework due Monday night at 11:59, I would like for you guys to come up with that list of 2 to 3 names. I will make an assessment for you to plug those names in. So just plug those names in. Again, I would just want the name of the person and your relationship to them. So, or their relationship to you. So again, if it's a parent, if it's a coach, what have you, I would like for you to list that person. All right, everybody. I hope you have a wonderful Thursday. You all take it easy.